Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with this panel. I won't speak long. I apologize. You all are going to hear from me a lot more than you want to over the next 2 days. I did just want to say this panel in particular about Muslim and Jewish voices finding common ground after October 7th. It may have been foolhardy of me to pick a panel of this topic, given how raw the pain is still for so many people, how much trauma individuals have experienced, and how much the world is still reeling from what happened after October 7th. So it is heroic and courageous of our panelists for being willing to be up here to discuss such a hard topic, and to do so with sensitivity and in a way that I think will model having discussions about potentially one of the hardest topics that we can right now. And I'm going to ask that the audience, when we go to Q&A, that your questions model the same sort of incredible sensitivity and thoughtfulness that I'm so excited to hear from this panel. But can we also just give them all a round of applause for being willing to even talk about this? And with that, I'll turn the time over to our moderator.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you for that small introduction and that helpful framing, Professor Barclay. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. My name is Erica Leza. I'm a rising 2L student here at the University of Notre Dame Law School. I'm not really sure why I'm qualified to moderate this panel, but I'm going to do it anyways. And before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. And I believe we'll start with one of our panelists who's actually joining us remotely via Zoom, and that's Reverend Dr. Andrew Teal. So Dr. Teal has served as an Anglican priest for over 3 decades. He is chaplain, fellow, and lecturer in theology at Pembroke College, University of Oxford. His research interests include patristic and modern theology, Eastern theology and interfaith dialogue, especially with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Reverend Teal also serves as affiliate faculty and visiting resident scholar at the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Reverend Teal is also warden of the largest Anglican convent in the United Kingdom, the Sisters of the Love of God, and is a trustee of the Orthodox Church's St. Theosevia House in Oxford. And Reverend Teal, I'll let you go ahead in just one moment. I just want to briefly introduce the rest of our panelists to our audience here. Thank you for your patience. To my right, Rabbi Alex Goldberg is a barrister, chaplain, and human rights activist. He is currently the Dean of the College of Chaplains and coordinating chaplain at the University of Surrey. He is the only rabbi to hold a similar role in all of Europe. Rabbi Goldberg is involved in several international and UK-based community relations projects, as well as serving as the Jewish chaplain at Surrey. Rabbi Goldberg regularly co-hosts a BBC radio show. He is a frequent contributor to BBC Radio 2's Pause for Thought, and he was a member of the BBC's Religion and Ethics Conference. He is the founder of the Jewish human rights group René Cassin, named after the co-drafter of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Rabbi Goldman is also founding chair of the Faiths Forum for London and the mayor of London's Faith Conference. Further to my right here, Professor Michael Helfand is the Brendan Mann Foundation Chair in Law and Religion and co-director of the Newt-Bar Institute for Law, Religion, and Ethics at Pepperdine Caruso School of Law. During the spring semesters, he also serves as the Florence Rogatz Visiting Professor at Yale Law School. He has taught a variety of courses, including contracts, arbitration law, Jewish law, and seminars in law and religion, as well as multiculturalism and the law. In addition to his academic appointments, Professor Helfand serves as the senior legal advisor to the Orthodox Union's Teach Coalition and a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Professor Helfand's work considers how U.S. law treats religious law, custom, and practice, the relationship between religious liberty and discrimination, and the intersection of religion and commerce. In addition to his academic writing, Professor Helfand also often provides commentary on law and religion for various public audience publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, and the Forward. Prior to joining the Pepperdine Caruso Law faculty, Professor Helfand was an associate at Davis Polk, focusing on complex commercial litigation. He previously clerked for the Honorable Julia Smith Gibbons of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And now, to my left, Ms. Soraya M. Deen is an award-winning Muslim feminist activist, community organizer, motivational speaker, lawyer, and founder of Muslim Women Speakers. She's also the founder of Nigerian Women Lead, a grassroots coalition that organizes Nigerian women. She's the co-chair of the Women's Working Group of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable in Washington, D.C., and chair of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable in her native Sri Lanka. Her work prioritizes organizing women for public leadership in challenging circumstances. She conducts extensive trainings and workshops on community organizing and on deconstructing received theologies and violent extremism. Having visited Israel after October 7th and participating in the March of the Living in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Soraya is a strong proponent of Holocaust education to combat anti-Semitism and to enhance Jewish-Muslim solidarity. She is currently reading for her public leadership credentials at Harvard University. And our last-minute addition to this panel, we're very excited to have her here, is Ms. Rachel Miner. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Bellwether International, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to building genocide resistance through freedom of religion or belief and economic development. Rachel has a bachelor's in economics from Brigham Young University and a master's in public administration from the London School of Economics. Oh, and also in political science, a second master's in economic and political development from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. She was also named a U.S. Truman Scholar in 2021. Rachel's research explores the economics of religious freedom and has been published in the Journal of Economics, Management, and Religion. And she's also a regular contributor on BBC Women's Hour, SiriusXM, and Newsweek. Her research also discusses the interaction between religious freedom and technology, artificial intelligence, and using complex systems to model genocide. She has presented at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, the Global Women's Summit, the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom, Interfaith G20, the International Religious Freedom Summit, and many others. If you could all join me in giving a warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you. And now we'll return to Reverend Dr. Andrew Teal for some opening remarks.
Well, good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me? You can. Well, first of all, can I give my best wishes to you all and my massive apologies for health reasons and not being allowed to travel. And I'm deeply, deeply annoyed at that, not least for the selfish reason I would like to be with a group of people whom I number, many of whom I number as dear friends. And I've seen one or two heads in the audience as well. I'm deeply grateful for Notre Dame University's hospitality and generosity. So I really wish you well. I did prepare some slides, but they're not necessary. And I don't know if someone's producing them, and if not, don't worry. The context of my presentation is quite a simple one from this point of view, as well as being involved in interfaith here in Oxford and in the UK. I'm primarily a higher education chaplain, a bit like Rabbi Goldberg. And our task is a shared one: to welcome, to listen, to encourage. I'm not an Anglican chaplain. One of the newspapers were going to run a story called "The Secret Mormon Chaplain" and expose relations and commitment to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they interviewed one of my students who's a Muslim, who knocked the story on the head in a beautiful way and said, they said, "You've got an Anglican chaplain who's a secret Mormon chaplain." I said, "He's not an Anglican chaplain. He's our college chaplain. He happens to be an Anglican, but he's my chaplain, and I'm a Muslim." I'm intensely grateful, both for her wisdom and for her kindness, but also for that stopping of that culture of trying to pigeonhole people into corners and and to make enemies of people who are actually trying to be embracing. As any higher education institution, Pembroke College, in its raison d'etre, is to unconditionally welcome all who come, and that means students, members of staff, teaching and otherwise. We don't want anyone to have to feel that they have to leave something core to who they are at the Porter's Lodge. And that means, as I put on one of the slides, that no student, staff member, or visitor should have to leave anything core to their identity at the Porter's Lodge. And that includes race, religion, gender, orientation, language, and cultural identity. And I think our college and higher education institutions really believe that. But it has to be admitted that since October the 7th, there have been real tensions emerge as to what that really means. If it's not just going to be something that we mouth and is a cheap thing to say, then we have to recognize that there is a cost. And the aftermath of October the 7th has really tested that. One of my key values is freedom of religion and belief. And that includes freedom from inappropriate projections of what religion and belief might mean. Many of the students I deal with, it's really interesting to see. I did a little sketch on the back of an envelope to see who's come and since October, and the massive numbers of people from the Muslim and significant, I wouldn't say massive, but significant members of the Jewish community have come and spent time talking about what it feels like to be loaded with narratives and expected attitudes that they don't want to carry. And I guess it might be an advantage for me respecting both the Jewish and the Muslim faith traditions from the point of view of myself following the prophet from the north, if as many Jews would look at Jesus, or the prophet of mercy, as many Muslims would look at him, and to actually stand outside both, but also then to be able to be entrusted with some of the pains and difficulties and indignities that many people have been loaded with, and as well as being freedom from inappropriate expectations, freedom for religion and belief means finding new and creative ways in difficult circumstances of trying to speak the truth and learn to be committed to dialogue. What's happening in the UK in terms of higher education after not only the incursion into Israel by Hamas, but also then the bombing of Gaza, is that we have plenty of encampments. Now, the United States has obviously knows this very much more profoundly, I think, than Oxford University, but even sleepy old Oxford with its beautiful sandstone has now got encampments around the Radcliffe Camera outside the National the Natural History Museum, and we've had incursions into the Proctor's buildings. We've had lots of arrests, and it seems to be a very inflammatory environment. It's not an environment where, at least publicly, it's easy for people to do what I've just said about trying to have creative and important dialogue. If you look at any of the photographs, and I did send some of what's happening around the Radcliffe Camera, you'll see that what look like actually quite middle-aged, middle-class people are wearing masks and dark glasses. So although people feel prompted to protest, there's also a great deal of fear. And that's certainly, I'm sure that the rabbis present, Rabbi Goldberg, will be able to say this, but lots of my friends who are Jewish, both students and staff, say they do not feel safe wandering around in Oxford or certainly in London being visibly Jewish. We'll come back to that in a second. I think one of the questions that it raises for me and that we've just discussed with students is is there a freedom not to be challenged or engaged in higher education? When people say they don't feel supported or safe, what might that mean? How can we move towards exploring that? And if our college is a home to everybody who is here and we want to feel safe, how do we deal with very difficult and competing attitudes, which can build, hopefully, an environment of invitation rather than entrenchment? For example, not on this issue, but last year we've had people asking who the preachers are at the choral evensong service. We have choral evensong services, and we've had Muslim preachers, Jewish preachers, Hindu, uh, um, Sikh. We've had a spectrum of Christian denominations. But people have always said, what are their attitudes towards, one email every week said, the transgender issue? And my answer was, my instinct was to get impatient and to just think this is just intimidation, ignore it. But I think to try to raise to it, to say, well, come and see, after the pattern of the one whom I'm actually perhaps asked to represent in terms of invitation and not exclusion. They didn't come and see, but never mind, we weren't cancelled. The cultural tendency, at least in the United Kingdom, is pressing more and more towards jumping to a nuclear option too soon and cancelling voices which are deemed to be challenging or easily ridiculed or mocked. One of the things that we recently had, which is still causing us a bit of trouble here in Oxford, we've had our final examination period, but during the last week of that, the examination schools where people have to take their exams were occupied twice, with the throwing out of examination papers out of the window into the public domain. And this meant that, in fact, everybody taking that examination, whether in the exam schools, if they had special needs elsewhere, it was invalidated. And the whole, what do we do in those circumstances where people not only want to press a nuclear option, but also some students feel it's important to, if you like, self-flagellate, to say, well, we want to stand, the argument was we want to stand in solidarity with universities and teachers in Gaza who are being bombed and are not able to take their exams. And one of the things that we want to try to do is to learn a model of integrity that sees the complexity and the compromise nature of each of us, to hold with integrity all things, all change, all circumstance, to love's embrace and to an understanding which befits the dignity of human beings and the religious traditions that we've been talking about. A friend of mine died a couple of years ago, very young, and people talked about his tutorials as being a moment where you'd come together to look at a subject, and then within moments, volumes of poetry, atlases, conversations, music, art would all be flying across the room. And that there's a wonderful moment where we discover that our rigid attitudes, or even our perceived core truths, need to be evaluated in dialogue. On a Thursday here, we have something called open theology, and that's become quite significant. We've had up to 9 or 10 religious traditions at each one. It's very much a conversation, lots of questions. But we found that not knowing is a humanizing dimension of the academy, that we bring our rigid attitudes and our prepared off-pat answers, and they don't fit. And in a sense, there's something incredibly liberating about supporting one another. And we can find that actually, well, I'm glad you think that. I don't. But it means that in the spectrum of our understanding of what it is to be human, that point is embodied. It's not just a nebulous idea. I was going to talk a little bit about how being in an academic environment can expand the frame of some of our discussion, and to talk about, if you like, what happened at the beginning of the 20th century with the First World War, and how religious impulses in that on all sides contributed to the chaos, to reflect upon Sultan Mehmed V's 1914 fetwa, and also to reflect upon the ironic work of Pope Benedict XV, who nearly bankrupted the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic, so it's not inappropriate apologetic, but in order to pursue peace and understanding. And that's the sort of thing that can happen in an environment of higher education. We can push the frame of a question beyond the immediate wound of which has been spoken of already this morning. And in great contrast to the encampment, the occupation mentality, one of the things that we do in Oxford, and we decided not to call it off this year, is a friendship walk, public display of friendship. We walk from the synagogue to the Radcliffe Square, which is where there's an encampment, and to the University Church, and then to Mansell Road Mosque. And we obviously had concerns about what would happen if we were walking past encampments where people were visibly Jewish, for example. And it was our Muslim friends who said, well, we will stand with our Jewish friends at that point, because that's when friendship, public friendship, is going to be really important to be shown as a tremendous contrast to the rhetoric of entrenchment and difficulty. Finally, one of the things that happened this year, we've not done it before because Sunday evenings are quite crammed on the religious front. We have an evening service and then we eat together. But on a couple of occasions, we've moved back into chapel and had what my Latter-day Saint friends have introduced me to the notion of fireside, where people will come and sit and have conversation. And one such fireside had about 30 people. There were Seventh-day Adventists and Latter-day Saints, Roman Catholic, Church of England, Orthodox, as well as Jewish and Muslim participants. And one of the moments which was both heartbreaking and massively hopeful, it broke the heart so that light could come in, was that a Jewish woman, girl, student, and a Muslim student talked together about some of the things that are being projected onto them, not only by so-called opposing communities, but also their own, and how they don't want to carry that. And wonderfully, they were able to not only empathize, but help one another. And the rest of us who were not part of those traditions stood with awe at the possibility of being determined to make opportunities for people to encounter one another, see beyond caricature and projection, to admit and to say there are things about my own tradition I find very difficult. The Jewish woman said, I don't want to have to choose between these two extremes. I want to find a place where we can be human together. I think, and it sounds very idealistic, it sounds very happy ending in a world that is far from that at the moment. But I guess this year, the friendship walk and then this fireside where people could talk to one another with integrity, as well as showing public friendship, to show real private friendship, that level of empathy, which I think bear the fruits of our faith traditions. And that's more or less, I think that's my 10 minutes gone. But thank you for starting this conversation in an intellectual and in a legal framework, because I do think it is an incredibly fruitful path that you're going on.
Thank you for sharing those glimmers of hope, Reverend Teal. I think now we'll pivot to Rabbi Goldberg to share his perspective, also in the UK.
Hello, can you hear me? It's on, good. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's lovely to see Andrew on the screen, and I look forward to seeing him in person when I'm next in Oxford, and we can have a cup of tea or coffee, or he can come to my religious life and belief centre. I'm honoured to address you on this crucial topic of Muslim and Jewish voices finding common ground, particularly in the light of the events of October the 7th, which have tested our community's resilience and tested its unity. At home, I'm a University Dean of Religious Life and Belief, leading a team of 33 individuals from 8 faith and belief backgrounds. The past months have been some of the most difficult professionally and personally as I grapple with the aftermath of October the 7th and the ongoing conflict between Hamas and Israel. I know both Palestinians and Israelis who have suffered during this time. I've lost friends. And back at home, things haven't been easy. But let me begin my story with a story that captures the essence of the journey that we need to go on. Everywhere I go around this campus, I've noticed fighting Irish, yes? And I'm a proud Irish Jew. And seeing references to fighting Irish, I'm reminded a few years ago that I was taking a black cab tour of West Belfast. Has anyone taken a black cab tour of West Belfast? I highly recommend it, just for the, oh, you have, just for the art alone. My driver listened to him as I told him that my baba, my grandma, was from Belfast and attended the Orange Methodist College. And my grandfather was from Cork, and recalled his elder sisters joining the Cumumna Ban, the Women's IRA, after the Easter Rising in 1916. Protestant Jews, Catholic Jews, that's my family. My taxi driver was completely confused, and he drove me to in and out of the Peace Wall in West Belfast, which divides the Catholic and Protestant working class communities in the area. And he parked in front of a mural, which was a Palestinian solidarity mural, and said, and I'm not there, I think there are Northern Irish people in the room, so I'm not doing the accent now. You see this poster, it's new, he said to me. It replaced a poster of the same subject. So whose side are you on? This poster was unveiled by the Sinn Féin, he called her the IRA Sinn Féin, the Sinn Féin MP for the MEP for the local area. Whose side are you on? They, the Catholics, the Nationalists and the Republicans, have Palestinian flags and Palestinian posters and Palestinian murals. On the other side of the wall, we, the Protestants, fly Israeli flags, paint Israeli murals, and are pro-Israel. So whose side are you on? I smiled and replied, it's a bit more complicated than that. He sighed and goes, right you are, and we drove on. Reflecting on my experience working as a chaplain at Surrey, and actually I was here in the fall at Princeton, I observed the deterioration of relations between Muslims and Jewish students due to these global political tensions. I also observed hope as Jewish students and Muslim students swam upstream, some of them, to maintain those relations. The violence of the October the 7th spread to my own town in England by October the 8th. When a Jewish midwife student, a single mum, was attacked in her home by a crowd, a gang who had seen a mezuzah, the sign that we have on our doors. I myself have received death threats. Other students have been intimidated and harassed. Religious liberty is never before been threatened in my country in the way it has now. And that religious liberty is a threat to Jews, and it's a threat to Muslims. But there is hope. I work today with our imam, born in Gaza, and he's played a pivotal role embodying resilience and unity, as did my external consultant, who's a former Muslim chaplain in the UK and here in the US, as did my intern Hassan, as did my Jewish students who set up a Passover cafe. Passover has never fallen in term time before. In 21 years I've been a Jewish chaplain. We set up a cafe in the small campus, and we invited our friends from across communities to munch matzah and eat other delicacies of the season. I can't mention them here. Anyway, there is a counter-narrative slowly being developed. We refuse to be enemies, and we seek the peace of the city. And we can only do that together. Naturally, we have a choice to celebrate, bury, or renew our model of Jewish-Muslim dialogue. And there are two freedoms in my tradition. There's, 5 minutes, RF. There's the freedom from, and her wrote the freedom to. And the freedom to is what we celebrate. We need a new covenant, a covenant between neighbors, between not just the Abrahamic family, but I'd say all families of faith. But right now, we need a covenant between Muslims and Jews in our neighborhood. We need a framework. My late teacher, Lord Sachs, the former chief rabbi, said, "Society is the home we build together. Jews, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, and secular humanists. But we need a plan." There are good things going on. King Charles has his own initiative at Windsor Castle and has brought together people for dialogue. The United Nations, where I occasionally work as a consultant, the OHCHR, and also OSCE's ODIHR, are working with me on a 6-city project, which demonstrates a coordinated approach to dialogue between Muslim and Jewish leaders. How does it differ from before? We are declaring that no more will we do show and tell interfaith, but a strategic bilateral dialogue which will frame our relations for the next 25 years. We need to learn from our past mistakes. We need to move away from the politicization of community politics and the balkanization of our major cities. We must act as one community in unity. Perhaps that's what I learned from when I do interfaith projects with football. We have a choice: one ball, one game, one community. Or is it 2 teams, 2 halves, 2 communities? We need a strategy where people sit down together, people with footfall, people who represent and encounter thousands of their own, and they need to take people with them. We need to normalize encounters between Muslims and Jews. No more can we leave it to religious leaders alone, such as myself, or interfaith activists who do it out of the goodness of their hearts. They are our allies, but they cannot be the be-all and end-all of encounter, interaction, and the search for equality between Muslims and Jews today. We have to break a triangle in Europe. There are 3 threats to me as a Jew to live in Europe. One is the growth of the hard left. One is the growth of nativist, populist, hard right, far right. And the other one, I have to say, is Coptism, the Muslim Brotherhood, and other Islamist forms of political extremism. I say political extremism, nothing else. And when I look at those threats, they are the same threats that I believe are threats to the Muslim community today in Europe. The surge in anti-Semitism is at record levels in my country and the rest of Europe. Second is the surge in Islamophobia. This is a race I don't want to be in. This is a race I don't want to win. I would like to live in a world where there is no Islamophobia and no anti-Semitism. So let me finish with a couple of examples. I'm working with the United Nations on their Faith for Rights program, bringing religious actors together. We will look at that six-city project in the hope of fostering more goals. In the last 9 months, we've also worked with the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council on producing a future level of leaders. If you Google me, you'll see I resigned from our English Football Association over October 7th. Well, I'm back again. And I'm back again to do good work. And I'm going to start with imams and rabbis playing kipi-yapi at St. George's Park, which is the home and training ground of the England football game. If you don't know what kipi-yapi is, Google it. I don't have time to tell you. My final project comes out of October 7th. I was being approached by the Corporation of London to do a project called Faith in the City. We want to build, or the corporation wants to build, a new multi-faith and belief center in the heart of our financial district. It's like Lower Manhattan. It's a square mile but has 500,000 workers. Jews, Muslims make up a serious percentage of that. It'll be a place to pray, it'll be a place to interact, it'll be a place to dialogue, and we'll have programs on ethics, on insurance, finance, and law, the main centers of the business in that city. They tell me that they do these projects when they put up a new skyscraper, and sometimes we get the top 6 floors. So maybe we'll be closer to heaven. In conclusion, if I can just conclude, we need a sustained effort, innovative thinking, a new form of strategic dialogue, and we need to create a future of Jewish-Muslim coexistence. Pope Francis says, every war is defeat. Nothing is solved in war. Everything is gained with peace and with dialogue. For those who continue to dialogue and hold on with their claws, keep on doing it, because peace will come tomorrow, and we will rebuild from the ashes of what has happened. Success will promote freedom, diversity, and inclusion. Failure is unthinkable. The last words go to my monarch, Charles, when he met me and he said, "What are you doing about this?" back in December, and I told him. And I said, "But our success may not happen he turned round to me and said, "We must but try. So that's what we shall do. You, me, everybody. Our collective journey towards peace and mutual understanding requires an effort from us, and hopefully will develop a new wellspring of strength and unity." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Professor Helfand?
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you again to Dean Cole, to Stephanie. I said yesterday morning when I was speaking, I show up at Notre Dame and everything is just awesome. I love this place, and it's just really an honor to be here. Even the tunnel that connects the buildings is awesome. I was like, this is the best tunnel I've ever been in. So thank you. I was chatting with Stephanie last night, and to be perfectly candid, I have struggled mightily to put pen to paper for this talk. And I actually spent some of my time trying to figure out why. I think part of it is, in my heart of hearts, I'm an academic, and I don't typically speak about my interfaith work. That's kind of my personal life, and at conferences, I'm an academic, and I talk about, law and things I can maybe every once in a while have some expertise about. I've got no expertise here, so I don't know what I'm sharing, but we're all going to find out together. In my personal life, over the years, I've had the pleasure of participating in various initiatives that bring Jewish leaders and Muslim leaders together. I've also had the opportunity to spend time in the West Bank, visiting refugee camps. Again, I never talk about these things in public, but these are things in my personal life that have been meaningful and important to me. And so again, discussing them academically, I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. And that's part of the challenge in putting comments together. Also, as everybody's noted, the bigger challenges, everything here is still very, very raw. On October 7th, I found myself with my family in Jerusalem, celebrating the Jewish holiday. 2 weeks ago, I spent my Sunday following my 18-year-old around as we watched, let's call it for now, a protest encircling one of my neighborhood synagogues. And, these events, they stick with you. They're what you remember. And they make it hard even for me to think clearly. And to be perfectly candid, and I haven't really experienced much. So many people are feeling so much more. For them, it's so much more raw. They've lost so much more. They've felt so much more pain. So I assume if I'm having trouble thinking clearly, those who are truly engaged and impacted by these events, I cannot quite imagine what that feels like. And yet here we are, so I'm going to give it a whirl. And here's my starting point. When I think about common ground at this point, I find myself trying to think about core commitments. And in so doing, probably because I'm an academic, I keep on coming back to two related, let's call them either legal or constitutional principles. And forgive me, I'm going to have a very U.S. approach to all this. The British folks sound so much smarter than me, so I don't know. Okay, in any event. First principle I find myself thinking about is our shared need to affirmatively protect, as both speakers already noted, each person's ability to freely exercise their faith. And in turn, maybe as a corollary, the second principle is a shared principle that a person's faith cannot serve as a justification to exclude them from the opportunities and benefits afforded others. For principles of free exercise here in the U.S., we of course need no look any further than the host of laws and doctrines that flow from the Free Exercise Clause of our First Amendment. And it comes to what I'll call an anti-exclusion principle. The Supreme Court has captured this intuition on any number of occasions. Maybe the most famous is the formulation that comes from Everson v. Board of Education in 1947, where the Supreme Court said, government, quote, cannot exclude individuals, Catholics, Lutherans, Mohammedans, Baptists, Jews, Methodists, non-believers, Presbyterians, or the members of any other faith because of their faith or lack of it from receiving the benefits of public welfare legislation. And it's not just public welfare legislation. When it comes to private institutions here in the U.S., we have enacted various federal and state anti-discrimination laws aimed at preventing the exclusions of citizens because of their religious commitments. These free exercise and anti-exclusion principles have been, by and large, shared principles across faith communities here in the United States, and this is particularly true of minority faith communities such as American Muslims and Jews. What this principle entails, at least in part, is a commitment to making room for faith. On the one hand, that requires protecting religious spaces, and on the other hand, it requires ensuring that a person's faith can never be used as a reason to exclude them, to never infer from their faith that they simply don't belong in shared spaces. I fear, however, these principles have been put to the test in recent months. This morning, I'd like to suggest that redoubling a shared commitment to these free exercise and anti-exclusion principles can ensure and should serve as common ground even in these deeply challenging times. And so to do so, I'd like to highlight the operation of these principles in three increasingly fraught areas of everyday religious life: work, worship, and education. Let's start with work. We'll have to wait for the 2024 data to be sure, but early indications from the EEOC are that incidents of religious discrimination in the workplace are up. Indeed, for that reason, the EEOC issued a fact sheet back in early 2024 titled, quote, "Anti-Arab, anti-Middle Eastern, anti-Muslim, and anti-Semitic discrimination are illegal." Evidently, we needed an update on that. It was a response to a growing number of cases across the country where individuals allegedly lost their employment because of what they believed. Now, these sorts of cases can, in some instances, be dicey. Employers often have employee handbooks that require employees to abide by codes of conduct. When employers uniformly apply those handbooks without bias, implicit or otherwise, to an employee's actual behavior, they are typically, although to be sure not always, on solid footing. But the fact that there are some legitimate instances where employers rescind offers or terminate employment is exactly why this area is so fraught and has potential for significant abuse. Indeed, problems become amplified when employers make decisions not based on an employee's actual behavior, but instead they make inferences from an employee's faith, when they assume that because someone is of a particular faith, that they simply can't fit into a company's culture. As the EEOC put in its fact sheet, it is unlawful discrimination to, quote, "treat an individual adversely based on the assumption that the individual holds certain views because of their religion, national origin, or race." And if we are going to be serious about advancing an anti-exclusion principle, we must be vigilant in ensuring that these sorts of assumptions and inferences don't spread in the workplace. Number two, worship. In recent months, we have seen a growing number of protests outside houses of worship, and in particular synagogues. It is, of course, true that individuals have a right to protest and that the right to protest must be protected. But at the same time, existing laws that protect houses of worship must be enforced if we are to protect the ability of faith communities to retain space for free exercise. This includes the FACE Act, which imposes civil and criminal penalties on any person who, quote, "by force or threat of force or physical obstruction, intentionally injures, intimidates, or interferes with, or attempts to injure, intimidate, or interfere with any person lawfully exercising or seeking to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of worship." The FACE Act, unfortunately, is rarely enforced or litigated, but that may need to change if we are going to protect the ability of religious communities to exercise their faith. To build common ground requires sharing a commitment to protecting the institutions of religion before behavior escalates even further. Finally, education. Obviously, this has been a front and center issue for months, especially when it comes to college campuses. There have been rounds of testimony before Congress of college presidents, and there have been debates over the right approach to campus protests and encampments. The Department of Education, for its part, has opened, I checked on Sunday, I'm assuming the number's gone up, 111 Title VI investigations since October 7th into educational institutions for allegedly discriminating on the basis of, quote, "shared ancestry and ethnic characteristics." And that doesn't even count the dozen or so federal lawsuits, it's been a few days, there may be even more, filed against various universities. Not what I want to talk about right now. What I want to focus on, again, is making space for faith, especially when it comes to student life, and not closing off spaces to students because of inferences from their faith commitments. This includes preventing students from accessing public campus buildings because they are dressed in religious garb, or excluding students from participating in clubs or student government because their religious commitments place them outside of what is socially acceptable. This sort of religious shaming and social ostracism is deeply corrosive to university life. It creates an environment of suspicion, one where religious affiliation and commitment can mean some spaces are not for the wrong kind of faith. Of course, some of this is prohibited by Title VI and in public universities by constitutional protections, but so much of campus life is a function of subtleties that can transform religion into a third rail. Common ground is going to require that we find ways to open these spaces back up. Maybe that's something too difficult to envision at this very moment, but committing to these underlying principles, to my mind, is the only way to build some sort of path forward. And with that, maybe I'll stop.
Thank you, Professor Helfand. Now we'll hear from Ms. Soraya Dean. Soraya will speak for a few minutes, and then she wants to share a short video with us that encapsulates a lot of her work and her perspective on some of these issues.
Thank you. Few minutes. As Stephanie said, this is a very important topic, very timely, but very deeply sensitive. In fact, I was not even feeling sure that I will come here because I thought my invitation would be rescinded. Because as Reverend Teal said, there's a lot of things happening from within the community for the work we do. I do particularly. But I'm glad and I'm grateful to be here this morning. I want to take a moment and remember Rachel Goldberg. How many of you are mothers here? You know, I'm a mother with 2 children, and before I had my 2 kids, I had 2 theories for bringing up kids. Now I have 2 kids and no theories. My daughter, last night, she lives in New York, she's 20, and she was taking the subway at 3 a.m., and I said to her, she needs to be careful, and she said, Mom, please chill. So when I met Rachel in Tel Aviv, she told me that her son, Hirsch Goldberg, who was kidnapped, had many Muslim friends, but nobody contacted her after he was taken hostage. And I promised to Rachel that wherever I spoke, I would highlight her sons being taken hostage. So we need to remember all the hostages, particularly 8 of American hostages, and every other hostage, particularly women who must be subject to horrendous sexual violence even as we speak. And not to forget the innocent Palestinians who are caught up in Gaza in this war, which they did not bargain for, but a terrorist organization has taken them into. Now, the title of this presentation is very challenging as well. My father would say, every setback is a setup for a comeback. So I'm keeping hope. Because let us not forget, in all our lives, we are either coming from a problem, we are in a problem, or we are going towards a problem. So it is with that optimism that I speak, because when Paul Kessler was murdered 30 minutes from where I live in Los Angeles, California, for merely carrying an Israeli flag, I reached out to the Muslim world, Muslim leaders in Los Angeles at that time, and I said, we need to condemn this, but nobody responded. And last month, when Temple Ada's Torah synagogue was desecrated, people were beaten in front of the synagogue, nobody responded. And then today we know 200 tombstones of Jewish, in a Jewish cemetery was desecrated. Nobody has responded. So what is happening is serious, my friends, and it is grave. And I would say in no uncertain terms, the Muslim-Christian relationships in the United States is lethally hostile. We are delegitimizing and dehumanizing the Jewish people, and our relationships today has become the first victim of this war in Gaza. And I am speaking to you not as a professor, as Professor Helfand said. I'm wondering, what am I going to say with these professional professors? I'm speaking to you from the perspective of a community organizer. I work in the margins with the people. I live, listen, and learn from the people. And those are the stories I share. So what I am saying to you today is from the lens of an organizer. So the social contracts between the Jewish people and the Muslims are broken, irrevocably, it might seem. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. I remember after 9/11, my son, who was 7 years, was bullied. He was called a terrorist. At that point, I didn't know what to do, and I reached out to my Jewish friends in Los Angeles. And it was the Jewish community who resuscitated us and who held us and who told us how to respond. And today, I feel we are not speaking up sufficiently for the American Jewish communities in the United States. Because of the relationships I built in the interfaith circles with my Jewish friends, Masha Nowak and I, we established the biggest and the strongest interfaith solidarity network and organization that brought all faith communities together, the Interfaith Solidarity Network. 5 minutes I'm up. So I will get to some solutions. Maybe at some point we can engage in more conversations, because what is lacking today is specificity. We can't work with generalities. We can't work with ambiguities. Certain very specific undertakings have to be made from both communities. For me, I'll be remiss in my duty if I don't speak the truth. My father had a phenomenal influence in my life. And he was the kind of person, he said to us, speak the truth even if it is going to cost you a life. So I say much of the hate and the anti-Semitism is learned. And some of the theological constructs that fan the flames of anti-Semitism needs to be addressed in the Muslim world. We saw Hamas terrorists committing the most heinous act of terror and calling out my God, my creator. They said, except Allahu Akbar. So I stand up against that. And it makes me wonder whether what have I been doing? Have I been addressing just the symptoms and not working in the causes? Because this is like my decade and a half of work, building interfaith relationships, and we have hit rock bottom. But I want us all to leave with hope. I don't know if you remember in 1986, after decades, centuries of the Jewish communities being accused and marginalized, Pope John visited a synagogue in 1986, and he said, anti-Semitism is anti-Christian. So today, I call on the Muslim leadership, especially in the United States, we have to keep saying anti-Semitism is anti-Islam, anti-Semitism is anti-Muslim. We need to say that. We need to openly declare this, because if what we are seeing in the universities could have been avoided in half if all the universities had come together and condemned October 7th. We're all walking with this invisible sign, recognize me, respect me, and we have failed each other in the way we have not comforted each other in this moment of grief. My friend Willie Jolly says how in his when he got his first speaking gig, he wore a mismatched jacket. He went to his speech and he got his check, and he was looking at the check and trying to get into the train to get to the airport. And he knew when he looked at that check that the check was already assigned. He had bills to pay, that this check was not going to be his to indulge in. And he was really sad about it. He was 40 years and scraping the barrel. And as he got into the flight, a man of 88 years was seated next to him. And he said to him, my goodness, I'm 88, but the best is yet to come for me. So he realized at that time, at 40, the best is yet to come. So I want to leave you with that message that our best is yet to come. Thank you.
In the interest of time, thank you so much, Soraya. In the interest of time, I think we'll skip your video just so we can make sure we hear everything that Rachel Miner has to say. Rachel.
Difficult position to be in to speak last. Let me reiterate my gratitude to the organizers, my fellow panelists, and just offer my most sincere prayer of humility. I don't speak on behalf of Jews. I don't speak on behalf of Muslims. I don't even speak on behalf of my own faith. I'm speaking to you in the spirit of sincerity and human dignity. And I hope that my words will be received in that spirit. And I hope most of all that what I say will not offend or aggravate the traumas that each of us are bringing into a very sensitive subject. All of my close friends are nurses and doctors. And their most difficult rotation when they're doing medical school, as they've told me, is the emergency room. Because when they step into the emergency room, everything is an emergency. How do you prioritize someone who is bleeding externally versus someone who's bleeding internally? How do you prioritize the constant demands from crisis that's happening on every side? We're living in the age of emergency rooms. We're in a poly crisis. And as a peace builder and as an advocate, I am frequently asking myself and my friends, how do you triage? How do we help so many people that are hurting, so many people that are in trauma? Bellwether's work is to disrupt the cycle of genocide. The world is trending towards genocide. On average, it happens every 2.5 years. The word genocide is conceptualized in the aftermath of the Holocaust. We can't speak of genocide without standing in solidarity with the Jewish people. But genocide in the last 20 years has not predominantly targeted Jews. It's targeted Muslims. The Rohingya in Burma, the Uyghurs in China, whose numbers are approaching now 4 or 5 million people in active genocide. I'm not going to bring the conversation of genocide into the context of October 7th. It's extremely political, it's extremely contested, mostly it's irrelevant. Because in the end, we're in an emergency room and there's a lot of people hurting. Palestinians are hurting. Israelis are hurting. But it goes so much more beyond that. As Alexander said, I'm really grateful for his words. It's not a race to the bottom. It's not a race to the most persecuted. It's not a race to the group with the highest amount of individuals killed, captured, or otherwise hurt. And we need to shift our focus away from that. Even though all of the advertising, all of the clickbait, everything that you've seen and interacted with on social media is to try to convince you that it is a race to the bottom. It's not. Let's take pause and start disrupting the cycles of genocide by disrupting the cycles of scarcity. That if you're not the most persecuted or the most killed group, then your voices are not heard. I dispute that. We hear you. We're with you. Before I founded Bellwether 5 years ago, I was trained as a sexual assault first responder. The most important words that you say to someone who's in trauma are, I believe you. Trauma disrupts the memory cycles and processes of the brain. The frontal lobe is flooded with cortisol, and women who've experienced sexual violence, but this goes even beyond women, this goes for everyone, they cannot recall the experiences that they've had because there is a chemical imbalance, because trauma impairs memory. So if we are truly in a moment of trauma with Israel and Palestine, our job should not be to piece together the memory of two people that are hurting. Our job should be to say, in solidarity with Jews, in solidarity with Palestinians, I believe you. I believe you and I stand with you. I tried to ask myself, what would my Jewish friends have me say? We have had excellent representation from the Jewish community. They've articulated from their hearts and from their souls, and I'm immensely grateful for that, some of the concerns that they've shared. First and foremost, there are still over 100 hostages missing. And I don't know why this isn't keeping every single person awake at night. This is one of the greatest hostage crises we've seen in the last 100 years. It's appalling, it's disturbing, I'm losing sleep. One of my dearest friends was taken hostage and killed just days after October 7th. And all of us should be thinking about this with urgency. What would my Muslim friends have me say? It's their voice that's especially close to my heart today. I've just flown here from Jordan, where we're setting up a trauma response for the thousands of Palestinians flooding across the border to Jordan. Jordan is already working with many Syrian refugees and others affected by conflict in the Middle East. When I was speaking to my friend from Gaza yesterday, she said, Rachel, what you need to understand is that what we're seeing in the news in Palestine, it's not children for us, it's our children. My daughter looks exactly like the victims that are on the news. My friends look exactly like the people in Gaza and Rafah. This is immensely personal for everyone, and particularly for the Muslim population who, when they see the suffering that's happening in Palestine, see their own children, just as Jews see their own children in the unfolding crisis that's happening. So my message is, how do we navigate this, and what does it mean to be a bellwether? The word bellwether means to be a leader, to be out in the front, to be an indicator of trends. I want to tell you a story that illustrates how each of us can be a bellwether as we navigate the events of October 7th and the aftermath. I had scheduled a trip to Israel, and I was due to arrive October 3rd. I was joining two friends, an Israeli advocate and a Palestinian advocate. They run an organization called Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun. They had organized what they call the Mother's Call. It was a march of thousands of Palestinian and thousands of Israeli women who came together and said, no more will we tolerate violence and the cycle of genocide that's persisted in both Israel and Palestine for many, many years. And just a few days before I was due to fly out, I had a spiritual prompting that I should not take this trip, which at the time felt extremely random, surprising, foolish. I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to stand in solidarity with a part of the world that's close to my heart. On October 4th, these women marched to the Dead Sea. They held a rally. And in their words, which I want to read to you, we, Palestinian and Israeli women from all walks of life, are united in the human desire for a future of peace, freedom, equality, rights, and security for our children and the next generations. We believe that the majority of the people of our nations also share our mutual desire. The march was an enormous success. A few days later, Hamas launched the most deadly terror attack since 9/11. And I found myself in a very complicated emotional state, feeling both relieved and enormously grateful and privileged, and also immensely guilty and afraid and worried that I had not been there for my friends, that I had not been there for a group of mothers that I love dearly. And it's been challenging to navigate the complex emotions of that since that event. I echo what Michael said. My trauma is certainly not the trauma of the Jewish people or even of the Muslim people, but certainly there's a shared trauma between us that can bring us back to the most important values of this discussion, which is that at the end of the day, every person in the world is worried about their family and their children. At the end of the day, mothers hold the key to the future of peace building, and that's what I want to end with. What is the power of this march? What is the power of mothers coming together to walk for peace? Apart from Harvard's research that shows that a 20-minute walk a day prolongs your life, increases mindfulness, and increases your health, your heart health, there's something about walking with mothers that I think is the key to navigating these discussions. Mothers are religious leaders, fundamentally. They understand life in a more visceral way, biologically, than other members of our society. Mothers are matriarchs because they are the source of life. They are also the stewards of life in the future. So violence against women, the role of mothers in society, all of these become really important indicators for the trends which our future holds. Mothers in Palestine and Israel based their march off of mothers in Liberia. In fact, Ellen Sirleaf, the first elected female president of Liberia, flew to Israel and Palestine to meet with the Mother's Call before the march on October 4th. Why Liberia? The women in Liberia said, peace is our goal, peace is what matters, peace is what we need, and we'll stop at nothing to achieve this. There was a military coup d'etat in the late 1990s in Liberia, and all the trends and early warning signs indicated that it was going to be a genocide and that there was going to be a massive loss of life. The mothers of Liberia said, we will not stand for this. So the first thing they did is they protested by blocking all of the military transport on freeways. Tanks were traveling by freeway through Liberia. And so the mothers sat on the freeway, thousands of them, and said, you won't pass. The military stopped transporting by tank. Next, they went to their sons and said, sons, give us your weapons, it's time to come home. They led one of the most successful disarmament and demobilization efforts that Africa has ever seen. Next, they deprived their men of all physical intimacy. All physical intimacy. A movement that had now grown to 5,000 women. Until their men protested with them at the ballot box. Then they went to the United Nations and sat in and waited in between meetings to corner officials and negotiate a peace deal. This is what it means to walk for peace. This is what it means to protest in the age, in the aftermath of October 7th. So here's my invitation. Can we please learn from our mothers? Can we please remember our mothers, our Israeli, Palestinian, Liberian, Jordanian, Brazilian mothers? Can we remember them? And in an effort to navigate the intensity of the aftermath of October 7th, I want to extend a specific invitation to all of you, which is to be a bellwether. Will you please call someone that you disagree with about October 7th specifically? And will you go on a walk with them? Will you walk with them and listen and practice trauma-informed response, which is to say, I believe you, you are safe, I'm holding space for the tension that we sit in, your human dignity matters to me more than your political views and your faith. And at the end of this walk, will you extend that invitation to walk to someone else? It is my most sincere prayer that all of us will join the mother's call of Israel and Palestine, and that we will walk together for peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Instead of asking questions here, I want to turn it over to the audience for Q&A. As Professor Barclay mentioned before, we have 2 microphones here set up in the center aisles. And please, I would love to hear some really wonderful, thoughtful questions for our panel, who I think have done just a terrific job with this very, very challenging topic. Thank you.
Yes, Rabbi Goldberg, you mentioned that you thought Britain was facing unprecedented threats to religious liberty. Beyond sort of the private anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and acts and so forth, are there specific legal or political actions that you had in mind?
There are 3 things I'd say. Firstly, I used to be the person that went to the Department for Education. And I remember sitting around the table one day looking at the public schools capital projects renovation, blah, blah. Okay, most are faith schools are state schools or public schools, which confuses Americans no end. And I read this thing about security, and I said, well, hold on a minute. We're spending about $5 million a year on schools, putting archers in, putting prison-style. My kids went to school behind a prison wall. That's what it's modeled on. There are bomb-proof windows. We have 5, 6, 7-year-olds playing dead lions on the floor. That's what you do when the terrorist comes. You pretend to be dead. Is this, I go to synagogue in France. I used to live in Paris. I said Shabbat Shalom every day. The first person I said Shabbat Shalom entering the synagogue was a gendarme with an M16 by his side. I think religious liberty is under threat. My old synagogue was bombed in the week of October the 7th in Berlin. They threw Molotov cocktails. Everyone's saying it's great. They didn't actually do any damage. They scared the living daylights out of a community. And when you get that, and you get mosques being fearful and churches being arson attacked, And when you get people being elected to Parliament who want to threaten other communities, who want to go on a ticket of populism or nativism in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Austria, in Hungary, when those people are gaining powers of regional, local, and now national governments, do I think religious liberty is a threat? Yes, I do. Those who say that we are at some hiatus of religious liberty, no, we were 20 years ago. Anybody that doesn't realize the threat is blindfolding themselves and walking into a world not of just of segregation, but of danger. I think the threat in Europe is serious and needs to be addressed. I believe there are people in politics, I believe there are people in civil society that want to address this. It's really hard being a moderate. It's really hard asking for religious liberty, democracy, and liberalism. For the first time in my life is being threatened because I'm being a moderate. So I'm going to be a radical moderate and say moderation things a little louder. I love democracy. I love the rule of law. I love the freedom that I enjoy. I love human rights, and I love my country, which has got a 250-year history, maybe more, since John Locke decided to give up on religious combativeness and say that we should live together in peace and tolerance. And I hope that people are listening, and I hope people do something. Thank you.
I just want to say this was such a fantastic panel, and I'm so grateful to each one of you, Soraya. I'm so grateful for your courage, because I know it really does take enormous courage in your community to say what you say. And Rachel, you're tying us back to the power of mothers, to find a path where one is not readily visible. So kudos and bravo to all of you. And my question is not a serious one, but I really want you to answer it. What is keepy uppy? I think we all deserve to know, and we may not have time to Google it. So please, what is keepy uppy?
Okay, so David Beckham is good at keep. Do you know David Beckham? He came here trying to make a bit of a career. I think he made more of a career as a model than a soccer player in the United States, but there we go. Keepy uppy. It's a skill that footballers like to show off, whereby you bounce the round ball on your foot or your knee or any other part of your body without it touching the ground, and then you count the number of times you keepy uppy. I'm really good when it gets to 3, but those who like to boast like got 100 or 200, whatever. But yeah.
For those of us who call it soccer, we call that juggling. So, British culture, Exhibit A versus American understanding. I think keepy uppy is maybe our new adopted term for this game, though.
Thank you for that translation, Rachel. We've got just a couple minutes left, so we have time for one more question if anyone is feeling courageous.
Or we can do keepy uppy.
If anyone has a soccer ball or football or a hacky sack. Yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Notre Dame as a bellwether. I think Notre Dame is just absolutely incredible in terms of its willingness to be tolerant and to promote dialogue. And I particularly feel that right now as other universities that might have, broader reputations for elite status, but they're failing as bellwethers right now. And in particular, they're failing as bellwethers in the way that they do not tolerate dissent. And what they are tolerating is violence and the inability to live the normal life of the community of universities. And I was struck when I was reading about all of the protests, but more importantly, the unwillingness of the administrations of these universities to prevent those protesters from disrupting the life of the university. I was reminded of Father Hesburgh's letter in February of 1969 in response to the Vietnam War protests, in which he said, I just want to read just one brief paragraph from his letter to the New York Times in February of 1969. This to me is, I think, Notre Dame, and this is what I think other universities are failing. I believe that I now have a clear mandate from this university community to see that, 1, our lines of communication between all segments of the community are kept as open as possible, with all legitimate means of communicating dissent assured, expanded, and protected. 2, civility and rationality are maintained. And 3, Violation of another's right or obstruction of the life of the university are outlawed as illegitimate means of dissent in this kind of open society. And then in the rest of the letter, he goes on to say that any protesters that disrupt the life of the university will be suspended and given 15 minutes to leave, and if they don't leave within 15 minutes, they'll be expelled, because they wanted to maintain the life of the university. And I just think it's remarkable how good Notre Dame is at promoting this. And Dean Cole has organized, I think at least, I know for sure, a half dozen events in this past semester promoting dialogue and discussion from all sides: South African perspectives on the genocide case, Jewish perspectives on anti-Semitism, just all sides of the perspective. And I just think I mean, those of you that don't live here and work here don't know it, but it's been just incredible to see. So I just want to make that comment. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Let me just add, thank you for that comment. As an economist, we're always thinking about transaction costs. Listening has a $0 transaction cost. And I think if we listened more, we would protest less, right? Protesting fundamentally comes from the feeling, personal, emotional feeling that I'm not being listened to, I'm not being heard, I'm not being understood. So you're right, Notre Dame is absolutely a bellwether. I applaud Dean Cole, I applaud Stephanie Barclay and the many other leaders that are leading the way, but let's take the lessons of Notre Dame into our lives. I think everyone here is affiliated with some institution of higher learning, your alumni organizations, whatever. If we can take these lessons into action, then all the words we've spoken today are not in vain. I hope that you'll take that challenge. I certainly will. I'll be contacting my alumni institutions and saying, hey, I just had this really important conversation at Notre Dame, and we should follow suit. We should organize and listen so that people feel heard as a first step to peace. So I appreciate your insight on that.
May I add something?
Yes.
Yeah, I quickly want to add something here because I have a daughter at college, and I fear that we might raise a generation of youth who will not have national pride. If you look at what's happening today, these are just not protests. There's no love for this country in those protests. Dr. King protested the Birmingham bus boycott. They protested for 1 year. At the heart of that protest was an unconditional love for this country, but calling out what was not right, what was unjust. So I would go a step further and really reaffirm this. What is happening is very disturbing in the sense that the death to America. I mean, this is like coming out of colleges is not acceptable. So we have to go a step deeper in this situation where we go to the biases. I think all the conversations must go beyond facility, FACILIT, to a deeper dimension of where is this hate coming from would be critical for us moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. So that just about concludes our time. I want to thank all of our panelists. Please give them another round of applause. They were wonderful. And I want to thank you all for being attentive and to joining us here and in this search for the challenge and the possibility of finding common ground. It's an incredibly important conversation, and I'm glad we're able to move beyond the headlines, beyond the sound bites here at Our Lady's University. Thank you all so much. Our next session will start at 10:45. Here in this room, we will have Women and Religious Liberty, and in our adjoining rooms, we will have the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in France. Thank you.